Welcome. I'm Judy Samuelson. I'm the head of the business. I started to say the Business Roundtable, Josh. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm the head of the Business and Society program at the Aspen Institute. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Josh Bolten, who in fact is the president and CEO of the Business Roundtable, in conversation today. It's exactly 1 year ago today, 6 a.m. in the morning, if I recall, that the Business Roundtable released a new statement about business purpose. It recalls language that many of us are familiar with. It went back to stakeholder capitalism. In some ways, it recalls Johnson & Johnson's credo that was first published in the 1940s. So while this isn't a new idea, it was still something that earned a tremendous amount of press that day, in that it put shareholders back at the bottom of the list as a part of the critical inputs to a successful business. We're dropping the statement itself into the chat box so you can take a fresh look at it. This statement immediately invoked controversy, as it renounced the idea that corporations exist principally to serve shareholders, playing catch up with contemporary thinking, but then of course also inviting all of us to lean in and take a closer look at what business is doing, how it's making decisions, if it's responding to critical societal needs, but also how it's balancing the reality. There's a lot of forces that keep shareholder primacy in place. Josh Bolten joined the Roundtable in January 2017 from a distinguished career in both government service and governmental relations, including leading the OMB and serving as Chief of Staff to George W. Bush. We've added his bio to the chat box as well. Fact check here, Josh, your wiki page also says that you play bass guitar in a band called the Compassionates. Is that a true statement?
It was true. That was a White House band. When I was budget director, my band was called Deficit Attention Disorder. Oh. And then when I was Chief of Staff, the band was called the Compassionates, thinking of George W. Bush's compassionate conservatism.
Very appropriate. So we've got a lot to cover. My plan is to weave questions in so feel free to place them in the Q&A box as they occur to you. And my job is really to keep things moving to ensure that we can cover as much ground as possible. So Josh, let's jump right in. I'd like you to take us, if you would, take us inside the BRT. I think a lot of us think we know the organization, but don't actually know what it does and who it represents. Tell us about the membership, how you decide who to engage in the association, and kind of how you describe it to others.
Well, first, Judy, thanks for having me, and particularly being a part of your very influential program, which had you personally and your Aspen program had a lot to do with where the Business Roundtable has come today on the issue of corporate purpose. Business Roundtable is 200 now of America's leading CEOs. The member is the CEO, not the company. And we feel that when it gives us extra clout as an advocacy organization, that when we speak with the imprimatur of the CEO, not somebody in the government relations function. Those 200 CEOs had companies that range in size from 5 billion in revenue or market cap at the smallest end to hundreds of billions in market cap and revenue. On average, a Business Roundtable CEO employs close to 100,000 people. So they are among America's largest employers. Now that average is skewed by, for example, Walmart, whose CEO, Doug McMillon, is currently the chair of the Business Roundtable. But by and large, these are among America's biggest employers, and they are among America's leading CEOs they joined the Business Roundtable, not just to keep up to date with what's going on with policy, but because they want to lean in on their responsibility as leaders in our society. And the Business Roundtable gives them that opportunity to do so collectively. We're nonpartisan. We don't, we take political stands on policy issues, but we don't engage in partisan politics. We don't make campaign contributions. And we try to work with both sides of the aisle, and have done so successfully for many years. The focus of the roundtable has been traditionally on economic policy issues. That is, this is where CEOs come together to advocate collectively on the issues that they think overall affect the society, our economy the most. They have, most of them are members of parochial trade associations, the the Petroleum Institute,
groups, right.
Pharmaceutical manufacturers, all of those. But they come to the Business Roundtable to advocate on behalf of the economy overall, and we like to think that we're doing the Lord's work in trying to promote a good economy, not just the parochial interests of some leading CEOs. And to the point you started with, our statement of corporate purpose, I think that that reflects the values that are in the statement of corporate purpose.
So let's go back to a year ago. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I saw this statement land in my inbox. It received a remarkable amount of attention, and the BRT gets, put some real media dollars in to make sure that it would be visible. What struck you at the time? What struck you and your members? Were you surprised at the amount of pickup?
I was surprised. I think a lot of our members were surprised at the amount of pickup. We knew it was an important statement. And
what made you know it was an important statement?
Well, if you have an organization of CEOs of 200 corporations and you decide to rewrite what you think the definition of the purpose of that corporation is, that's bound to be a big deal. But we thought it was a big deal mostly to us and to those who are keenly focused on what's going on with America's large corporations. But it turned out to be a much broader big deal than we anticipated. And I don't think that's because, I'd like to think it was because the Business Roundtable is so important and influential, but I don't think that's it at all. I think it is that the statement struck a nerve on on general interest in and anxiety about the purpose of corporations in our modern society. And it struck a nerve with those who are anxious about the state of capitalism in America today.
Absolutely.
So I don't think we created the debate. Judy, you were in the debate for years beforehand. But I think the timing of the statement really gave it much more prominence than most of us expected at the time it was issued.
So let's talk a little bit more. There was a lot of enthusiasm, but it was tempered by a mix of criticism and also a lot of cynicism. I think the controversy really did center around this fact that it literally recalled prior statements that had elevated shareholder value as the organizing principle of corporations. But I think that it seemed to us that the pushback was coming both from those who feel that, as shareholders who are best equipped to kind of monitor progress of companies, and that they felt that that was now at risk or could be at risk. But also that there was a lot of cynicism from those who kind of probably on the left side of the spectrum who who believe that business, or are still wondering if business will or is doing anything differently. So where did the BRT feel pushback most keenly, and kind of how have you responded, or have the members responded to this over the course of the year?
We've heard it from both ends. You mentioned that we put some dollars behind our promotion of the statement. One of the things we did is we took out 2 full pages in the Wall Street Journal. The first 2/3 of a page was the preamble and the statement itself, which thank you for putting it in everybody's chat box. And the next 1 1/3 pages were the signatures of 181 CEOs, which was almost, at the time, almost the entirety of our membership. There were a few who opted not to sign. 181 personal signatures of CEOs on the statement, which I need to tell you was not easy to get, because most companies don't let the CEO's signature out the door very easily. So that was logistically difficult to get. It turned out not to be that hard to get the approval of the CEOs that, yes, I want my name on that statement. Anyway, so we took out those 2 pages in the Wall Street Journal, and I don't remember what it cost, but it's not cheap to get 2 pages in the print edition of the Wall Street Journal.
I can tell you the price. It's not, yeah.
Oh, you can? All right. And then that was back when people were more commonly reading actual print newspapers. And the next day, the Wall Street Journal bitterly criticized the statement as undermining capitalism. And it bothered them so much that they wrote another editorial the next day. So we heard it from the right that you're abandoning shareholders, and in so doing, you are undermining capitalism and the efficiency of our economy. And likewise, we heard it from mostly the left, but actually across the full spectrum. We heard skeptics who said, yeah, we've heard this kind of blah blah before. I won't celebrate until I see how you're living up to the values expressed in the statement. One of the reasons that we're celebrating this 1-year anniversary, I'm celebrating, is that I think in the past year, companies have lived up to the values in that statement.
So I can't help but think back over the last year. I literally had to kind of say, what's happened in the last year, to be reminded of the extraordinary things that we've all been contending with. Brexit, trade wars, and impeachment, street protests from Hong Kong to Santiago, the pandemic, of course, which has kind of taken all of the air out of the room, and the economic meltdown that's followed, and took all the air out of the room until our own streets began erupting after the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So I guess the first question I really have as we look forward in this moment is, like, how much room do boards really have for anything but crisis management today? What's kind of the tenor of the conversation now in boardroom and executive suites?
Well, I think in most boardrooms and executive suites today, the focus has to be on how do we navigate through the crisis, or actually the multiple crises that we're experiencing at the moment. But most of them are doing it with a relatively clear eye on the longer term horizon. I mean, there are a few companies and a few industries for whom these crises are truly existential. I'm thinking of the travel industry in particular. And so they I think have to be particularly focused on managing through the current crisis. But my sense is that most other C-suites and boardrooms are still keeping their eye on the longer term horizon and trying to set themselves up to be competitive in the future, be good corporate citizens in the future, to continue to be provide good products and services for their customers, to continue to provide good jobs and security for their employees, to be a good partner with their suppliers, and to be good citizens in the communities in which they operate. So you've probably noticed that I've listed all of the stakeholders that are in the Roundtable's corporate purpose statement,
Right.
Because I think that's how most of our companies have approached the crisis, which is, how do we behave at this time of crisis to take care of all of our stakeholders, which in the long run is in the interest of our long-term shareholders.
So let's go to this question of jobs and wealth, which I think is, in some respects, has kind of been the defining question of the BRT statement. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, who was chairing the BRT while the work was going on the statement itself, said, "The American dream is alive but fraying." And the headline of the press release when the statement came out is, "Business Roundtable redefines the purpose of a corporation to promote an economy that serves all Americans." I guess I kind of want to ask how we're doing on that front, but in the American public, I think we're all pretty clear, is not feeling much confidence in how wealth is being allocated in this moment. But what would your members say? What's required different of them now? Or is it that they kind of can hit the pause button for now during the pandemic and, Harvard resources? Like, how urgent is the sense that change actually has to happen?
I don't think the pandemic has lessened the urgency and commitment to the principles in the corporate purpose statement. I think it's actually underscored them. Mm-hmm. And I think most of our member companies are seeing that what they need to do in order to play the role that they should be playing and make sure that they're in a good position on the other side of the crisis is that they need to take good care of their stakeholders. Now, America's biggest companies are most of them are in the relatively luxurious position of being able to suffer a catastrophic drop in demand for their goods and services for at least a short period, and still have access to capital, still be confident that they can have a going enterprise on the other side. Many of the country's smaller businesses are not in that kind of position, and for them the crisis is more existential. But that's one reason why the CEOs of the Business Roundtable, when they gave us on the Business Roundtable staff our instructions on the advocacy that they wanted us to pursue before Congress, what they instructed us to do was to do our best to make sure that individuals and small businesses are supported through the crisis. We did not advocate for a lot of bailout the big companies provisions in the legislation. They wanted us to advocate for direct transfers to individuals, and most importantly, the forgivable loans that are hopefully keeping a lot of America's small businesses at least give them a shot at opening up, at being viable after the crisis is over.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the crisis has really you said a pause, which is how almost every reporter that called me once the crisis was underway said, "Yeah, I suppose this means you're going to have to pause in the corporate purpose statement because the economy is so bad." And I'm proud to say that I think the result has been the opposite. It has it has deepened the commitment of CEOs to take care of their stakeholders who are vulnerable during the crisis and can very much use the help that some of America's largest corporations are able to offer at this time.
So many of them were able to keep employees in place for a while. I think, that's probably a question that's still playing out in the next, months as we see some of them take different decisions. One of the things that's cropped up in the last month as Congress has been weighing reinstituting the unemployment benefits is the belief that the unemployment benefits had actually been too high, and it might be dissuading people from going back to work. Our colleague Maureen Conway in the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute posted a piece in Politico today that basically said Congress is asking the wrong questions about that. It's not that unemployment benefits are too high, it's that wages haven't moved in 30, 40 years. What's your response to that, or how would your members respond?
Well, I would say both. I think Congress overshot on the unemployment benefit, at least in some regions, and the anecdotal evidence is pretty strong that they overshot. That there were people who were doing better with unemployment benefits than they were with their regular jobs, which is not the kind of incentive you want to give people. You want them, if they can, to go back to work, and the companies want them to. But we were very supportive of the supplemental unemployment benefits and remain so. They just need to be calibrated in a way that doesn't create a disincentive to work. Now, on the broader question of are wages high enough, the answer is from Business Roundtable companies is the minimum wage is in fact too low. And most of our companies pay substantially more than the minimum wage. Most of them pay even substantially more than anybody suggested raising the minimum wage to.
So Josh, that takes us. No, go ahead. Sorry.
But our companies are on record as of a year ago saying that the minimum wage needs to come up, and they'll be supportive of that if and when the issue really starts to ripen.
So I'd like to learn.
Won't be the case again until next year.
Until the next Congress convenes.
Next Congress,
so
yeah.
I'm aware that the BRT, in essence, it's really about policy formation more than kind of the practice of individual companies, but the public, I think, naturally focuses more on business decision making and doesn't necessarily think about the BRT's role in policy formation. So how do you, I guess I have two questions. One is, what are the priorities on the policy front? If you can give us some, and kind of how have they been influenced by the work of kind of rewriting the purpose statement, if at all? And then kind of how do you manage both? Like, what's your real leverage point as an organization? Is it on policy, or is it influencing practice among companies in some way, shape, or form? So kind of priorities on the policy front, and kind of what levers do you have as an organization to move practice as well?
I'll take the questions in reverse and say that the levers are our advocacy voice and our practice. I think they reinforce each other. That when, as an organization, we as the Business Roundtable can and have advocated for something like masks should be required in indoor spaces, and retailers should that government regulation should require people to wear those masks. And so we've advocated that as a matter of public policy, but we also happen to have in our membership Walmart and Target
right.
and CVS, and when they implement that, then it becomes much more of the norm and more comfortable for government to go along. So
right, that's where the headlines were.
As to our levers, the two reinforce each other. On the priorities, right now the priority has to be on the crises. we've got the health crisis of the pandemic, we have the economic crisis that the pandemic has generated, and we also have the latest chapter in the crisis in racial equity in this country. And that's where the roundtable is really putting its effort and muscle, pushed by our members. This is not, those would be my recommendations to the members, but I didn't need to recommend that to them.
What does that look like?
What does what look like?
What does it look like when the BRT leans in on this question? Like, what are we watching for?
On the racial equity question?
Yeah.
I would say within just a few days of the publication of a horrific video of George Floyd's death, the chairman of our organization, Doug McMillan, was on the phone with me saying, this feels like a very important moment, and I want the Business Roundtable to lean in on racial equity issues. We've all cared about them for quite some time, but the tough truth is that we haven't made much progress either as most corporations individually or as a society. And Doug said, I want us to lean in both on the broader systemic questions and on our role as corporations individually. So what that produced was basically 5 working groups of the Business Roundtable, each with one of our CEOs chairing it, looking at what we can do on the policy side to promote racial equity in the country. And those 4 working groups are on education and workforce first, on healthcare, on finance and financial inclusion, on diversity and inclusion within our corporations, and how many did I list so far?
I think you've also done something on police reform or local.
Yeah. So the last one that I want to emphasize is the one we called it equitable justice because there's more to it than police reform. But all of a sudden, the Business Roundtable has a committee developing policy on police reform. Now that's not normally in our swim lane, but the CEOs felt strongly enough about it. Importantly, their employees felt strongly enough about it that they decided they needed to play a role. And so Randall Stevenson, who just stepped down as CEO of AT&T, went into extra innings with the Business Roundtable to help on this particular issue, spent about a month devoting, I think, the majority of his time to getting smart on policing reform issues, to talking to everybody from the head of the Fraternal Order of Police to former President Obama, and seeing what role America's major CEOs can play in bringing the parties together on really constructive legislation. That has not yet succeeded. That's floundered in the Congress, but I'm proud of where the Business Roundtable has been in trying to bring we've brought our members together on positions. And I think when the time comes, we can be helpful in bringing our political process together.
So Josh,
on meaningful reform legislation.
So we've got a little less than 15 minutes left and like 20 more questions on my mind. You don't mind, do you?
No, I don't mind.
But let me come back, if I could, for a minute to the kind of basic questions around inequality and profit sharing and kind of who's benefiting. We have a stock market that's roaring. We know that it is far from a bellwether of the economy at this point. Something less than 50%, something about 50% of Americans, I believe, have any money in the stock market, but the vast majority of those have under $100,000 invested. That may be a significant amount of wealth for some of them, but it shows just how out of sync in some respects the stock market is with the health of most of us. So I kind of come back to what the levers are here. And if we could just put up the question about actually raising the minimum wage. If you look back at Doug McMillan's predecessor way back, Lee Scott, I mean, he mentioned back at the time of, you know, in the kind of wake of Katrina when Walmart was really leaning in, starting to lean into these questions and said, I see in the future we're going to really have to raise the minimum wage. Is that on the table now? Will the BRT kind of establish a benchmark and put some real heft behind it? And then I got a couple of other things I want to touch on before we'll need to close off.
Sure. Minimum wage, the answer is yes. We were already on record a year ago as saying it needs to go up. And
without a target, in other words, just saying it needs to go up.
Without a specific target, but that was in the context of a moment when nothing was actually going to happen. But I think as action starts to happen, yeah, I do expect the BRT will lean in on, okay, here's what we need to do with the minimum wage, maybe with the earned income tax credit as well, to make sure that every American has an opportunity to earn a living wage. Now, just one important footnote on this, we have to do this with some humility because overwhelmingly the Business Roundtable companies are way above the minimum wage. And in fact, most of them are well above,
right,
you know, even the $15 an hour that has been kind of the high watermark.
It's a benchmark for, right.
Yeah. So it's not by and large our companies that are likely to see some change from that, and we do have to take care of the small businesses in America who even self-interestedly, Business Roundtable members recognize are their suppliers and their customers, and so we do have to be cautious about that. But the answer is, yeah, I do expect Business Roundtable to be an active advocate when a serious minimum wage discussion starts on the Hill.
So, what issues, you know, jobs has been front and center, economic opportunity has been front and center. One of the issues that kind of has receded in some respects in importance, although at other moments I feel like it's coming back full force, and that's climate. What is the BRT's role here? It's hard to imagine that this is not an issue that has seized the attention of most business leaders, and they wouldn't rather be facing a world of greater certainty and to kind of use the policy levers that are available to us to get carbon priced appropriately and to kind of unleash the market to do what it does best. What's going on there?
The last time the Business Roundtable took a position on climate was almost 15 years ago, and a formal position. And the Roundtable at the time was proud to have been the first general membership business organization to acknowledge the existence of a climate problem. We're obviously way beyond that today. And not only is there widespread acknowledgement of a serious and urgent problem for the planet, but we're at the point where I think a lot of different elements need to come together on, okay, so what exactly are we going to do about it? And
is this a matter of
again?
Sorry, go ahead.
Judy.
I was thinking about the complexity of managing a trade association, where in some respects there's winners and losers here. How do you come to a consensus on something like this?
Yeah, it's hard, but I think that's part of both the joy and the effectiveness of the Roundtable, is that the members come there with an understanding that they need to approach some of our biggest problems not so much from their parochial points of view, but from the point of view of the overall economy in which they all have to operate. So we've got ExxonMobil in our membership, and we've got Apple in our membership, and somehow we need to find a way that we bring our membership together on a public policy agenda that really can seriously address climate, which by the way, everybody in the Business Roundtable does want to do, including our big oil companies who have constructive positions that I think would surprise most people, and hopefully will help lead us toward some sort of collective action, both in the United States and critically for the climate issue internationally, to address it. So I in answer to what I expect is your next question, Judy, yes, I do expect the Business Roundtable over the course of the next month to make a statement on our principles with respect to climate, and I think you can expect to see us advocating aggressively on them. You probably would have seen that already, but for the crisis that blew everything else off the radar screen.
So let me ask you another. This one's from one of our listeners today. You know, climate is one example of kind of a stakeholder who's not at the table. Who's the stakeholder who gets to advocate? You know, many of the kind of issues or priorities that people are leaning in on and hoping that we'll be seeing more leadership in the business sector, you know, representing kind of stakeholders that can't bring proxy, you know, proposals to necessarily to a board, or they can't take their grievances to the Chancery Court. What is the most effective way for people outside of the business sector to really engage with your members? Like what gets their attention? And I guess that leads me a little bit to think about whether or not employees are the best avenue today, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Employees. That's exactly the answer. I mean, look, the statement on corporate purpose, it wasn't a statement of business against bad things, and you know, we'll deploy the shareholders' capital to solve every societal problem we can. That's a recipe for a lot of companies that aren't going to survive in the future. The focus of the corporate purpose statement is on the stakeholders, and the first stakeholder that's mentioned in the list of stakeholders is the customers.
Right.
So if the customers are demanding that the companies that they are going to patronize reduce their carbon footprint, those companies will listen to that. And even more important is the one you mentioned, Judy, which is the employees. So leasing reform was a good example of that, where Randall Stevenson, who is an extraordinary corporate leader in my book, and has a great touch and sensitivity to what his employees are saying and feeling. He jumped into the policing reform business because he heard it from his own employees that they wanted their leadership to take a stand on an issue that's been festering in our society for decades. And so when the CEO hears that from the employees, they will respond. And that's what's really reflected in the corporate purpose statement.
So the questions that are surfacing in the chat take us back to kind of first principles here, that people observe that the statement is aspirational maybe in some respects, but certainly a statement of intention, let's say, but it doesn't always seem to square with reality of what the choices are that are made by business on the ground. So I guess I'll do a follow-up question that I'll give you a spoiler alert. It's about CEO pay, but the first real element of this question is really, what's the BRT's role here? Do you have some responsibility to kind of monitor or make judgments about this, or is that outside the mandate of what they of what the members come together to consider?
Yeah, they don't. I mean, they don't come together as an organization to have us, finger wag at each other. They do come together, though, to try to agree on common principles, and in a sense give themselves a general direction to shoot for, and to give themselves collectively a response to shareholders who say, wait a minute, what's happening with the quarterly earnings? And a CEO is in a better position in responding to his or her shareholders when they can say, no, I'm following the model of the corporate purpose statement, and I'm not looking to next quarter's earnings. I'm looking to the earnings that we will have 10 years from now, if we have properly cared for the rest of our stakeholders in addition to the shareholders. So that's what the roundtable is there for, is to give them a common place to agree on principle and to agree on their collective aspirations.
And on the other side, when it feels the business isn't moving quickly enough, how do you respond to that piece of the criticism?
The CEOs will feel that when their stakeholders believe that they're not responding quickly enough. But we take that in at the Business Roundtable. And a good example has been the racial equity stuff, where and diversity and inclusion within our own corporate ranks, where every CEO will probably say, I've been working on this, and
right.
we're making some good progress. But the outside world is saying, and to some degree the inside world now is saying, yeah, we've been trying. We have not sufficiently succeeded at this point, and this is a moment when we really need to double down on inclusive-ness and diversity within our own corporate ranks, and our CEOs are taking up that challenge. It's a criticism, but they're welcoming it.
Josh, let me end on two questions.
And trying to respond to it.
Let me end, if I might, on two questions that kind of are more in the governance domain. The first one is about pay. It's a conundrum, I guess we could call it a conundrum, that at the same time that we're living in this era now where the intentions that have been set, that stakeholders come first and shareholders are not the organizing principle. And yet CEOs are mostly paid in stock. I mean, most of your members, stock is the most important part of their pay package, which means that they're doing quite well and that their pay is going up as a result of the stock market going up to some degree, or to a great degree today. And yet these things feel in conflict to me. I mean, let me put it this way, is the conversation open about kind of the questions that relate to inequality and pay? Are the CEOs leaning in on this question about kind of how will pay follow the kind of aspirations of this statement, what might need to change?
Well, bear in mind that the way we ended up with CEOs being so heavily compensated with equity rather than regular wages was part of a reform movement that said you need to be paid for performance, and the measure of performance that has been prevailing is the share price. Now, one thing that the statement of corporate purpose does is it takes us away from an exclusive focus on short-term share price to look at the other attributes. So I think increasingly CEO pay will be dependent on other attributes of performance in addition to share price, which remains very important, obviously, in the life of a corporation.
In the real life.
Yeah, I think the CEO pay conversation will be ongoing. The view from the principal view from the roundtable is that CEO pay ought to reflect the long-term, and I underscore long-term, value of the corporation and the CEO's contribution to it. Beyond that, you need a truly independent board of directors setting CEO compensation, and I know that's something that, Judy, you've been working on for some time about who sets the compensation and how, and I think that conversation is open among the CEOs today.
So you said the magic word boards, and our last question is about the role of boards. You've seen all the same things we've seen. That one element of question that people have about this is that the CEO seemed to act unilaterally. They didn't have to engage their boards. What's the meaning of that to you? In the decision to sign on.
Oh, you mean the corporate purpose statement?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a silly criticism of the corporate purpose statement. What you're referring to is somebody did a study and called up a lot of companies and said, did the board approve the corporate purpose statement? And the answer is no. Very few actually took a vote on the board of the corporate purpose statement. Part of that is that a lot of our CEOs consider the values of that statement so well embedded in the values of their companies that they don't need to go to their boards to get that approved. They already have that. They just need to do the work of living up to it. The other thing I would say in response is that I do know anecdotally that plenty of CEOs told me they had a conversation with their boards about having signed on to the corporate purpose statement. They didn't put it to the board for a vote, but they had conversation about it. And once the board, and there was some criticism along the lines of the concern about abandoning the shareholder primacy and therefore abandoning the profit motive. But every one of the CEOs who described it to me said to me that when given a chance to explain that the stakeholder approach is essentially a support for all of the stakeholders of the company in the long-term interests of the company, what they got was, I think, unanimous assent from the boards that, okay, this is the right way to proceed. Tellingly, no board has reversed any of the CEOs who signed on to the statement. And since the 181 CEOs that we had in membership at the time signed on to the statement, we've had additional signatures since. And I expect it will be. I'm looking forward to the day when there's no controversy in signing on to the Business Roundtable principles. And Judy, I have to say, in our as we're getting near the end of our session, that compliments to you on the role you played in it. You have played in it for a number of years, and the ongoing role that I expect you will play as you continue to try to hold us to account.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today. Let's call this intentions well set. We've got your back, but we've got your front too, I think. And I think there's a lot of people out here who would love to be able to ask questions directly. So we've been able to do justice to some of it, but thank you all for attending. I know these questions are not going away, Josh, and we're at the table because we believe so deeply that business has to be at the table in addressing these complex problems that are instrumental to business and society. And so thanks for kind of opening up the organization to us a little bit today and for the work you're doing to help us move forward.
Thank you, Judy, and I look forward to the next occasion.
Excellent. Thanks. We hope there is one. Thank you all.